a varied career, and you've had quite a significant change as well, I think, Sarah, which I hope you'll talk about. Initially, I'd like you to talk about the A levels that you took in school and how you made any decisions that you did during sixth form.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the A levels that I took biology, chemistry, economics, and then I did maths AS level. And I guess the reason I took all of the three sciences was because I didn't know whether I wanted to be a doctor or a dentist or something else. So I just wanted to keep my options open. And economics was there because I thought it was interesting. And at the time when I was at the school, we could only do that for A level. So I guess it was a bit of a risk, but I thought I would find it really interesting. Chemistry and maths, probably not so much. Wasn't really interested in them, but knew that I had to have them. If I wanted to go into an economic style career, you often need maths. And if I wanted to do medicine, like I said, I would have needed both of the sciences at the time. But I guess looking back, it was a good job. I did take especially biology and economics. I loved them for a start. I had great teachers. And both of those things really ultimately formed part of the job I do now. So currently I work within healthcare, and it's really important that obviously you know about human health, so you know about biology, which I did as well in my degree, as well as knowing about the economics that surround it. So specifically healthcare, it's quite, well, it is politically motivated in the UK, but it also sits in a global market. So I think for me, it was looking back, it really put me in good stead because it was important to sort of understand supply, demand, and the sort of the different economic factors that came into play. So for what I do currently, I look at, one of the things I do is business cases for new hospital developments or redevelopments of bits of site. And one of the things you have to do is if you're going to build a new building, you need to be able to prove that it's going to benefit the wider economy. So things like if you're going to improve a ward, then you're sort of improving that service, and then people might have less hospital-acquired infections. They'll be able to then maybe have a shorter length of stay in hospital, an early return to work, and then ultimately contribute to the economy quicker. So looking back, I'm pleased that I did take them, but to be honest, I just took them for one, liking biology and economics, or thinking I would, and two, kind of keeping my options open. I mean, I did drop maths, and I will come on to my A-level results after this, but yeah, it was quite interesting.
So how did you make a decision about what you wanted to do at university?
So that's quite interesting. It took until my gap year actually. So I thought that I wanted to do biology at university, and that was fine. And I picked two London-based universities, and I just came to the decision because I thought I really like it as a subject. But I think the problem is, obviously at school, you don't have experience of a lot of the subjects you can study at university. So what I ultimately ended up studying, which is biomedical science, sort of as a derivative, I guess, of biology. So I chose that because I really liked it. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do maybe post-grad doctor, like medicine or dentistry or whatever. So I just thought, we'll stick with that. But ultimately, what happened is I missed first time round when I got my results. I picked two universities that were too close together. So I picked UCL and King's, and they have about a grade apart, or they did at the time, which if I didn't make my grades, it was likely that I wasn't just going to slip 1 point. And therefore, I ended up missing it quite considerably. So that left me with no choice but to go into clearing, which I did, and I got my highest mark in economics. So I had a real sort of like rethink of everything, and sort of thought, well, I thought I was going to do biology, potentially maybe biomedical science, who knows? But now I'm going through clearing, and because my highest grade is in economics, do I completely change what I do and go into economics? So I thought about that for a couple of days, but it just didn't seem right. So what I ended up doing was taking a year out, and just deciding to resit my chemistry, which was a B maybe, or a C, I'm not quite sure, and my biology, which was a B, in the hope that I could pull them up and potentially go to university the following year. But quite interestingly, what I did on my gap year was I worked half the week in a dental surgery as a dental nurse, and then the other half of the week in a GP practice in quite a deprived part of Liverpool. So I was able to start off from that point on, start gaining like NHS experience, and obviously I had a clinical role. So looking back, it held me in really good stead, because not only was I understanding sort of the process of how the little bits of the health system were working, but I had this sort of the feeling of how clinicians felt when I was doing my dental nursing. And ultimately, I mean, it was when my friends were at university, sort of having the time of their lives, making new friends, and I was at home. It was quite difficult. And at the time, a lot of people didn't take years out. But it was the right thing to do. And the following year, I think I missed my grades again. But this time I had UCL as my firm, which would have been a straight 3As. And then my second was Newcastle. And I think this was for biology. I know at the time UCL didn't do biomedical science, so I think I'd put biology for both. But on results day, when I've found out that I got into Newcastle, I think I just phoned them up and I was just like, would you mind if I switched to biomedical science? And they said, yeah, right. So luckily I managed to switch onto that, which has sort of formed the basis of, I guess, my career into sort of like the medical side of things.
So how did you find studying for your exams on your gap year? Was that difficult? How did you manage that?
Yeah, I think it probably was, because I don't think I was allowed to, and maybe was allowed to go to a couple of revision sessions by the school. I can't quite remember. Yeah. But a lot obviously is self-motivated. So even though I did increase my grades, I think it ended up with like A star, A, B or something. I didn't get quite what I needed to be able to go to my top thing. And I think looking back, potentially it would have been worth maybe going to some sessions at school, or sort of, I don't know, maybe looking at things or getting a tutor or something, because I guess learning the AS, even though I'd already learned it once, learning it again is quite difficult, especially when you're used to a teacher teaching it to you.
Yeah, and how do you feel about your gap year now? Because I know that lots of our students that don't come out with the grades that they want, they're sort of quite anxious about a gap year, even though I think sometimes the students that I speak to afterwards, it's the best thing they could have done in terms of making an informed decision and just taking a bit more time. And I know when you're 18, it seems like a lifetime, but as you get older, it seems like nothing. So how do you look? Obviously at the time you felt, I guess, sad and maybe a bit demotivated because everyone else is already there doing what they want to do. But how do you look back on your gap year now?
Yeah, so you're quite right. At the time, I just thought, oh, I'm already behind and I haven't even started, essentially. But now looking back, I learned so much in my gap year from doing the jobs that I did. I got to go traveling with some of the money that I earned from the jobs that I had. And I also got to go visit all of my friends, well, a lot of my friends that were already at Newcastle, London, Birmingham. So I got to, even though I think you have to do your UCAS pretty early, that year I still got to go sample some of the nightlife in all the various university towns. And that was great. It really made, or like reaffirmed that actually I made the right choice in choosing Newcastle, because I'd already been there, and it's, I think going there and staying there for a weekend with a student is very different to going there on an open day. So it actually turned out really well. But yeah, at the time, it didn't feel that way.
And how did you find your course then at Newcastle? Did you enjoy your course?
Yeah, so biomedical science is great. I really recommend it for anyone that's interested in medicine, or just isn't quite sure what they want to do, or didn't quite make the grades in medicine, it has a very similar first year. In most universities, the first year is very similar for biochemistry, biomedical science, microbiology, all those kind of things have like a very similar first year. And then after that, you're allowed to go off and specialize in what you want to do. So it was quite intense. It was probably 9 to 5 almost every day. And you had to attend because there'd be things like labs involved where you would be signed in, and if you didn't attend, then there would be emails sent out and it just wouldn't be good. Whereas a lot of my friends who did arts degrees and sort of bachelors of arts and history and geography had a lot less contact time. So for them, they got a lot more downtime, which I was jealous of at the time. But the 9 to 5 rigidity of the course meant that like you just had to go. And we were lucky that a lot of our lectures were online, but there were certain things like the labs, for example, where you really had to be there. And if you weren't, then you would have been really far behind. Yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like going forward, but at the time it was intense, but I'm glad that there was that structure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be quite an uncertain time, I think, in September. So
Yeah.
in terms of when you finished your course, did you then look again at postgraduate medicine, or what was your decision at that point after you finished your degree?
So loads of people from my course went on very successfully to do either undergraduate medicine, so like a longer 5-year course, or a postgrad 4-year course. And almost everyone who wanted to, bar maybe a handful, bearing in mind there were probably 150 people on my course, a lot of them that missed the grades the first time round for medicine, they went on to do medicine. And I did think about it quite heavily, but nothing had really changed. The reason why I didn't want to do medicine to begin with is because this is going to sound hilarious, from like the blood and the guts and the bones, and it's like quite a big thing. I'm sure you do get over it, but that was something where I just thought, well, deep down, and my intuition is saying probably not. It's probably not for you. It's also a big risk to go, and then having so much clinical contact time and not being able to hack it if you're in like surgery or A&E or whatever. Obviously, there's a lot of times where doctors don't have to do that. But so that was kind of what did it for me. A lot of my course went on to do things like physician's associate as well, which is sort of like an interesting hybrid role between like doctors and nurses, and have quite a lot of...
We delivered an alternatives to medicine course at the beginning of the other week, and it was talked about. I think there's quite a large bursary available for those courses now as well. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah,
there is, and I know 2 people from my course that have done it, and what they do looks really, really interesting. So what else did people do? People went into insurance. There were all sorts, some like big sort of jobs in the city, some finance jobs. But in the end, I just thought, I don't know, I'm not sure if medicine's for me. I'd just come out of university. And there probably was a part where my friends already graduated last year and they'd already got jobs, a lot of them. So for me, I just thought, well, I know I want to be in London and I still really like healthcare. So I'm just going to see if I can try and get a job in London about healthcare.
Yeah, so where did you start then? What did you do? What was your first job out of uni?
So my first job out of uni was, I literally think what I did was apply on, I don't know what it would have been, some sort of, it wasn't as good back then, but these days you have things like LinkedIn Jobs, which is probably the best job platform. But this was sort of like an Indeed job, and it just said sort of like healthcare consultant. I didn't really know that much about it, but I kind of was interested in it. So I had quite a good understanding and knowledge already, probably not specifically in that area that the job was looking for, but enough to be able to pass the interview, which was fine. And then weirdly, they rang me a couple of days later and were like, do you want a job? So it's like, yeah, okay, fine. Started the job and actually didn't really realise until I got into the job what it was about.
Okay.
So the specific nature of the healthcare consulting that I went into was estates related, so essentially building new hospitals or redeveloping hospitals. And at the time, I thought, oh, have I made the right decision? But anyway, I did it for like a year and a half, which was fine. And I still kind of do that job now, but I'm more specialist in a specific area. There's a couple of areas that consultants do. They're sort of like a jack of all trades, but I went and specialised in one area. About a year and a half into that job, I actually quite badly broke my leg and had to take a couple of months off work. So on my return to work, I was probably in quite a lot of pain, and I've been put forward to be seconded. And for people that don't know, seconded is where you still work for your company, but another company needs you, and that might be the NHS or whatever it is in that sector. So the NHS were looking for a full-time project manager, which I went for while working at my company, and it would be like a full-time seconded role. So I'd still work for the private sector, but I'd be working for the NHS, and I'd be based out of their hospital site. So I ended up hobbling to the interview with my little leg, and it was probably, looking back, probably quite a big job, but I guess because I'd just been through quite a traumatic sort of thing with getting my leg better and all that kind of stuff, I was kind of like, I don't know, nothing kind of scares you at that point. So I was like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. And then we ended up winning that job. So then I did get seconded full-time into the NHS, which was great because I was probably given slightly more responsibility than I had been at my other sort of firm as a consultant. And suddenly people were like wanting things from me, and I was in charge of a big budget, and I had like meetings with like clinicians, and then also we were talking to Camden Council about different things. And ultimately that job was for a mental health trust, and it was for the relocation of their site to a new site. So that would be sort of designing the building and disposing of their current site, purchasing the new site, and all the things that went on. So it was very much a learn on the job kind of scenario, but it was great.
This is a job that you wouldn't have known in school that even existed, probably, would you?
No, exactly. So I ended up doing that, which I loved. And then I think a year into that, they offered me a job to work for them directly. So essentially in the same role, they just changed the name of it to reflect all of the responsibilities, which is a program manager. And I ended up joining the NHS for a couple of years doing that job, which was great. And then a couple of years into that, my first boss at my first company, the one that I got seconded from, he started a new team at the company I'm at now called WSP. And they're an engineering firm, so they're the engineers behind the Shard and also Alder Hey, the new Alder Hey, and a load of other things. But he was starting like a healthcare advisory team there. So he said, "Are you still happy in your job?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I can't tempt you, can I?" And I thought, well, I don't know. I feel like a lot of my friends, especially in this generation, have had quite a lot of job changes.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's to do with sort of the millennial sort of aspect. I'm not sure, but it seems a lot of my friends, can't think of any apart from maybe like accountancy or doctors that have had the same job since leaving uni.
Yeah, they think that's a trend now, don't they? That it used to be sort of a ladder, and now it really isn't. It's much more sort of jumping across to different things. So yeah, it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, it's definitely out of my friends. A lot of my friends have now gone back to retrain in different areas.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've all had quite varied jobs. So ultimately, I ended up going back to the private sector and working for WSP in their sort of new team. But we work almost exclusively with the NHS. So I'm still constantly getting that sort of feeling.
So tell us about your day to day then. What does your day look like?
Day to day. So I'm trying to think what the best thing to do would be. I actually have a couple of slides. I don't know whether that might be more
Yeah,
interesting.
I
If I can share my screen.
can make you a presenter. So, oh, I think you already are a presenter. So can you see the little screen button at the bottom?
Yeah, if I try and share my
Yeah, you can
screen.
share screen or you can do presentation.
Is that going to work? Can you see?
Not yet. No.
No.
Oh, yeah, I can. Yeah, it's loaded.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can see?
there, I can see. Yeah.
Great. So let's see if I can try and find my PowerPoint where it is. So, what is healthcare planning? So let's go with this. Let's get rid of my notes. Here we go. So essentially what I do is split down into 3 broad categories. One of them is estate strategies, which is essentially where you would go into a healthcare provider, or I've done universities as well, and you'd look at where they are now, so what their estate looks like, so all of the buildings that they have, and then we'd look at where do they want to be, so where do they want to be in the future, do they want to have better buildings, do they want to reduce their estate, do they want to have new models of care, and then we'd sort of make a plan for how they're going to get there. So that's like a big overarching strategy. And a sort of a drop down from that would be business case writing, which if any, I mentioned earlier, if any hospital or GP practice or mental health trust wants capital investment, so money for a new development, they will have to write a business case, which generally has to go to, if it's over a certain value, it will go to Treasury. And it covers all sorts of things like the strategy behind the development, sort of the deprivation levels and the demography of that area, the economics behind what it's going to look like and how it's going to benefit the wider economy, the finances, who's going to manage it, all that sort of stuff. But they're quite hefty documents. And as the project goes on, you go into more detail and ultimately end up with procuring a contractor and architects and stuff, which end up building the building further down the line. And then the thing which I'm most interested in, I'm probably doing the most of at the moment, is healthcare planning. So this is a World Health Organization sort of explanation of what it is. But ultimately, it's being the conduit between the architect and the clinician. So what we do is we'll go into a specific hospital. So say if we're looking at an emergency department, we would look at the geographical area or the population around that ED department. What do they mean? Like, what do they need? What does the deprivation look like? Are they going to need more cubicles because of the nature of stuff that goes through there? Are they going to need more mental health stuff because of what the population is telling us within that area? And then we look at what they've got now and plot what they potentially might need in the future. So that comes in loads of different things. We might look at demand and capacity. So if we look at the demand that's going through the A&E department now, what does that look like now? But then in 20 years' time, when this new centre is built, what is that going to look like then? And we look at things like population growth and make sure that we are building for the future and not just for today. There's other things that we might look at, such as what workforce are you going to need? So it's all well and good building a brand new hospital, which is 25% bigger, but where are those 25% extra nurses going to come from and all that kind of stuff? So there's loads of stuff that it covers. A lot of the stuff we do is, well, all of the stuff we do is wrapped around patients. So patient is the centre and we just manage the things which are in this circle. So we'd look at things like the design team, we'd be looking at best practice research, making sure that they're adhering to regulations and guidance, and also being that interface between sort of the design team and the clinician. So making sure that we're getting all of the intel, and we've got the doctors on side and the nurses, and they're inputting into ultimately the design of the hospital, because they're the ones that are going to be using it. And quite often we'll have patients involved in that process too. So this is just a quick summary. We'd look at clinical requirements, look at the functional content. So what rooms do they need to be able to deliver their care? So when a patient arrives, where do they go? They'll go to the desk and they'll sit in the waiting room. So it's literally going through, plotting a patient's journey through the hospital and making sure you have a space for each of those points on the journey. That will then come into a schedule of accommodation, which is essentially just a big list of rooms, and that's then designed by an architect who will look at the room numbers and then the adjacencies. So essentially what services need to be together. Often it's good to have ED really close to the front door. You might need a imaging suite within ED, so things like x-rays and stuff. Quite often you might need a lab near the front door too, because people are quite poorly and you need to be able to get those results quickly. So it's about us explaining these things to maybe an architect, and then the clinicians inputting into that, and then ultimately coming up with a design. And then we'll go through the process sort of with the architects and with the clinicians, finalising the design and saying, this doesn't work, this pathway isn't right, all that kind of stuff. So in terms of a day-to-day, it's probably along the lines of a couple of meetings with clients, especially at the moment, it's all done over video. So a couple of video meetings. And then I might be looking at some data like I was this morning. So looking at some hospital data and some activity of a whole hospital site actually. And then I might be potentially putting together a presentation, which I was also doing this morning for this. I'm trying to think, what else have I done in the last week?
So what are you working on a project at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm working on Horton, which is a hospital in Oxford. So it's part of the Oxford sort of group of hospitals, and we're looking at the redevelopment of that whole site. So essentially they want a whole new hospital, which is quite exciting. And it's come from, I don't know, the link back here is, I don't know if people remember that Boris had mentioned that there would be 40 new hospitals built in the next, I think it's 15 years or something like that. So a lot of these hospitals have been named and are now coming forward into that process where they need business cases, designing, and that'll be ongoing for the next 15 years. So it's quite an exciting time, I guess, to get into this kind of area. There are a lot of, I think post-COVID, there are a lot of projects now starting to happen. Obviously, currently, our clients are busy. They're busy converting their hospitals into COVID wards, or trying to convert the hospitals back, or trying to get up to date with sort of business as usual stuff, like getting back to operations and appointments and stuff. So it's quite a weird time. Like my day isn't usually what it would be. But yeah, there's quite a lot of exciting projects on the horizon.
Yeah, and that will certainly keep you busy as well.
Yeah.
So just before we finish, obviously this sort of wasn't what you imagined or where you thought you'd end up. So what do you think's been the most important thing? Because it sounds to me like it's a skill set rather than a sort of qualification, I guess.
Yeah, so I think looking back, the real important things have been probably doing biology and economics at A levels, just because they gave me a good basis of understanding. Doing my degree to a certain extent because the medical school in Newcastle is actually in a hospital. So I was already familiar with what a hospital layout would be. I was essentially going there every day for 3 years. And then what else was good about Newcastle? I think there was also the opportunity to, we get pulled into a lot of discussions about specific diseases and their requirements. in the built environment, so in the building. So it's good that I'm able to recognise those things because I did a degree which sort of explored it. Obviously, at a different level of detail, but at least I do have a good sort of basic level of knowledge. I think so. It's a passion for healthcare. Definitely emotional intelligence. I think we often have to manage a number of different competing priorities, whether it's the architect wanting to design a shard hospital or the clinician wanting a massive space for their department, which obviously is important, but maybe doesn't need the big space that they're pushing for. So there's obviously a lot of competing needs. So you obviously have to be quite astute about listening, being kind, but then also having the intelligence to know sort of where the boundary lies. So definitely emotional intelligence. I think, this is going to sound silly, but definitely kindness. I think a lot of people think that in business, or it's definitely something that I had a perception of, is that you need to be sort of cutthroat, and you can actually get really far by just being nice and kind and doing the best you can for clients and being nice to your colleagues. And it seems to, I think it seems to have put me in good stead. I mean, obviously there are days where I could be kinder, but I think that's definitely a key skill, and it's definitely benefited me. And then I guess the final thing is being able to talk the clinical language. So being able to speak to a clinician about a specific area of medicine, but then being able to turn to a contractor and say, okay, so this means that we need X amount of rooms, or we need medical gas piping in and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think there's definitely something about being the conduit between those two things. I think that's it in terms of skills. I think I've exhausted them.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
No worries.
Yeah, it was certainly something that I didn't know very much about at all, actually, and I think it's great to hear sort of a different route into a profession that's perhaps less well known.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's definitely something which doesn't have the people feeding into it. And it's a pretty niche, small market which needs people coming into it from like a graduate level to be able to keep it going. And hospitals and healthcare isn't going anywhere, so it's going to be an important profession, I guess, going forward. And hopefully it will inspire maybe a couple of people to go for it.
Does anybody have any questions to ask Sarah? If you could pop them in the conversation box.
I stop presenting.
I can't see any questions, Sarah, so what I'll do is if you and I hang on for the next couple of minutes,
Sure.
And we can answer any, and then if any students don't have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave the meeting. I must say